For a long time on General Hospital, the story of Gio Palmieri and Brook Lynn Quartermain has lived in the spaces between what was said and what was left unsaid. He was the son who never knew he'd been loved from a distance, and she was the mother who had given him up as a frightened teenager and then had to learn how to live with that choice. So when an episode finally gave Gio the courage to look at Brook Lynn and call her Mom, it was more than just a line of dialogue. It was the culmination of years of guilt, anger, misunderstanding, and quiet longing, for both of them. And it unfolded against the backdrop of another complicated father-son relationship, one that cast an even sharper light on how fragile and precious that single word really was. From the moment Gio stepped into Dante Falconeri's orbit, it was clear that their dynamic would never be simple. Dante, fiercely protective of his son Rocco, met Gio not as family, but as a perceived threat. Before the truth about Gio's parentage came out, Dante viewed him as the kid who was always around when things went wrong, the one who made bad choices and then stood in the wreckage feeling guilty. When Rocco landed in trouble with the law, it was all too easy for Dante to channel his fear and frustration into blame, and Gio became the lightning rod. Instead of being treated as a confused young man who'd made mistakes and was trying to fix them, he became the scapegoat for every worst-case scenario Dante imagined. That pattern had already played out once before, when Rocco was hospitalized for alcohol poisoning. Gio had panicked in that moment, thinking that letting Rocco sleep it off in the Quartermain boathouse might be enough. He was wrong, and he knew it. But instead of being met with guidance or a measured attempt to understand how things had spiraled out of control, he was met with fury. Dante's anger was raw and unfiltered, less about what Gio had done and more about what might have happened to his son. He seized on one detail after another: the failure to call 911, the decision not to reach out to him or Lulu, the misguided belief that the situation would resolve itself. Dante's voice became the soundtrack of Gio's worst fears about himself. That he was careless, that he was reckless, that he somehow invited disaster just by being there. When Rocco's legal troubles later erupted, the cycle repeated with even more venom. In a heated confrontation, Dante all but told Gio that the wrong boy was in jeopardy. Rocco, he argued, should have been protected, while Gio should have been the one facing consequences. He hurled accusations that cut straight to the bone: that Gio had hurt his own brother to impress a girl, that he was irresponsible, that he was flirting with a life defined by bad decisions. The words hung in the air like a verdict: loser, disappointment, burden. Even if Dante never finished the insult, everyone watching could feel the point land. For Gio, those moments weren't just arguments. They were confirmations of everything he had always feared an authority figure might think of him if they really looked closely. His apologies came tumbling out, desperate and genuine, but apologies could only travel so far when they were met with a wall of unforgiving anger. That became the emotional reality of his bond with Dante, a relationship defined by tension and unfinished forgiveness, by a father who didn't yet know he was a father and a son who felt himself constantly judged and found wanting. Against that stormy backdrop, Brook Lynn stood in stark contrast. Where Dante saw a troublemaker, she saw a boy carrying more weight on his shoulders than anyone his age should have to bear. She knew that part of that weight was tied directly to her own past. As a teenager, frightened and overwhelmed, Brook Lynn had given her baby up for adoption. It was a choice that might have been practical on paper, but in her heart it never stopped aching. When Gio learned the truth about his origins, his initial reaction was a mix of anger and betrayal. He couldn't understand how a mother could let her child go, and he didn't yet have the emotional distance to see the girl Brook Lynn had once been, scared, alone, and convinced she wasn't enough. Instead of chasing him down or demanding immediate forgiveness, Brook Lynn did something that required its own kind of courage. She stepped back. She listened to those around her who urged patience and gave Gio the space to feel what he needed to feel. That restraint didn't mean she cared any less. On the contrary, it revealed just how deeply invested she was in letting him come to her in his own time. She understood that true connection couldn't be forced, and that sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is wait at the edge of someone's anger and hope it eventually burns out into understanding. Life, of course, refused to pause while Gio and Brook Lynn quietly circled one another. Ned Quartermain's sudden health crisis crashed into the storyline like a thunderclap. A heart attack sent him to the hospital, and in the chaos that followed, Gio became the unexpected hero. He was the one who stepped in when seconds mattered, the one whose quick thinking helped save Ned's life. For all the accusations that had been thrown at him, for all the times he'd been painted as irresponsible or careless, here was proof that when it truly counted, he could rise to the moment. For Brook Lynn, the sight of Gio at Ned's side in that critical moment reframed everything she already believed about her son. Gratitude and pride blended in her eyes whenever she looked at him in that hospital corridor. She didn't just see the boy who had once slammed doors and thrown hurtful words in her direction, she saw the man he was becoming, compassionate, brave, and far more capable than anyone, least of all himself, seemed willing to admit. While Dante clung to Gio's worst mistakes, Brook Lynn leaned into his best impulses. She didn't excuse his errors, but she refused to let them define him. That difference in perspective became palpable when Michael Corinthos stepped into the picture. Michael, a quiet observer of so many of Port Charles's tangled family dramas, recognized that there was someone Brook Lynn needed at her side. When he called Gio and told him that she needed him at the hospital, it wasn't just a logistical choice, it was an emotional nudge. He knew that Brook Lynn had been trying to stand strong through Ned's health crisis, shouldering her own fears while still worrying about the son she barely knew how to reach. Michael's call created the bridge that neither Brook Lynn nor Gio knew how to build alone. When Gio arrived at the hospital, the energy in the room shifted. The sterile, humming backdrop of machines and hushed conversations faded into something more intimate the moment his eyes met Brook Lynn's. She was tired, emotionally and physically, but the sight of him standing there seemed to bring something back into focus. In that small, contained space, mother and son finally found the courage to be vulnerable in front of each other. They sat close, hands finding each other almost instinctively, fingers lacing together in a way that was both tentative and profoundly natural. The scene that followed was quiet by soap standards. There were no shouting matches, no grand gestures, no sweeping declarations in the middle of a crowded nurses' station. Instead, the power of the moment lay in its restraint. Gio, still raw from Dante's harsh words and still reeling from the guilt of Rocco's troubles, let the facade crack. Brook Lynn, seeing the pain that Dante's anger had carved into her son, made it clear, without needing to shout, that she did not share that harsh judgment. She knew Dante's fear for Rocco was real, but she also knew that fear had twisted into something too sharp, too cruel, and she refused to let Gio believe that Dante's anger was the final word on who he was allowed to be. And then it happened. The word that had hovered over their story finally found a voice. Gio called her, Mom. It wasn't shouted or flung out in a moment of panic. It was spoken softly, almost like a test, as if he was trying out a truth he wasn't sure he deserved but desperately wanted to claim. The impact was immediate. Brook Lynn's expression shifted from surprise to wonder, and then to a deep, aching tenderness. For him, that single word was an act of surrender, an admission that no matter how complicated their past was, some part of him had always wanted to belong to her. For her, it was a kind of absolution, a sign that the choice she had made as a frightened girl didn't have to be the end of their story. The scene worked because it didn't oversell itself. It trusted the audience to understand that years of grief, resentment, longing, and hope were packed into that small, seemingly simple exchange. Brook Lynn didn't suddenly become a flawless mother, and Gio didn't instantly shed the baggage of his past pain. Instead, the show allowed them to exist in a moment of mutual comfort. She reassured him that he was not the sum of Dante's worst accusations, and he, in turn, tried to steady her fear about Ned's condition. Each of them was both wounded and healing, both caretaker and cared for. In that sense, the hospital scenes did something particularly rare. They let a parent-child relationship grow in two directions at once. Brook Lynn wasn't just there to nurture Gio, he was there to support her, too. Her gratitude for his role in saving Ned's life and her pride in the man he was becoming gave him something Dante's criticisms never could, a sense of worth anchored in love rather than obligation. Meanwhile, Gio's decision to show up when she needed him, to sit by her bedside and hold her hand, gave her a kind of emotional anchor she hadn't even realized she was missing. As the episode drew that thread to a close, the emotional residue lingered. Dante's harshness hadn't vanished, and his relationship with Gio was still painfully fractured. Rocco's troubles weren't magically solved. Ned's health remained uncertain. But something fundamental had shifted. Gio now had a place where he didn't have to prove his value every second. Brook Lynn, who had once believed that signing a set of papers meant forfeiting her right to be someone's mother, discovered that motherhood could still be reclaimed, not through legal documents, but through a single, hesitant word spoken at precisely the right time. For viewers, the scene stood out not because it was flashy, but because it was honest. It acknowledged how messy blended families and long-buried secrets can be. It showed how damage done by harsh words, like Dante's cruel implication that Gio should be the one facing punishment instead of Rocco, can linger in a young man's mind. But it also showed that kindness, patience, and emotional accountability can begin to rewrite those narratives. Brook Lynn didn't try to erase what Dante had said. She didn't pretend it hadn't hurt. She simply refused to let that pain be the last word. If there was a quiet architect behind the moment, it was Michael, whose call to Gio set the reconciliation in motion. Yet the real work happened between the two people who had the most to lose and the most to gain. Brook Lynn and Gio met each other not as abstract roles, mother and son, but as two flawed human beings trying to piece together a bond that life had stolen from them once already. And by the time the scene ended, it was clear that they had taken their first real steps towards something lasting. Going forward, the hope is that the show allows this fragile new bond to deepen rather than fracture under the weight of external pressures. Gio still has work to do with Dante, and Dante will have to face the painful truth that his fear for one son led him to wound another. But no matter how that plays out, Gio now knows he has a person in his corner who sees him as more than his worst mistakes. And Brook Lynn, finally, has the chance to live the role she once thought she had lost forever. In a world as chaotic as Port Charles, where alliances shift overnight and secrets erupt without warning, the gentlest moments are often the most powerful. A boy calling a woman "Mom" might seem small compared to mob wars, courtroom showdowns, or hospital emergencies. Yet in this episode, that single word carried more weight than any explosion. It marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where healing is possible, even after years of silence, and where a simple, quiet scene between two characters can leave an audience in tears, grateful that love can still find its way through the mess.